All right, there's audio and video. There are some notes. Let's get some water. And away we go. I had to buy a new mountain bike recently. And of course, I use the phrase had to very loosely. Of course, I didn't have to buy a bike. But here's the deal. My son has been an avid mountain biker since he was about 4 years old. At 3, we got him a balance bike. By 4, he was doing things on that bike that I'm not sure the manufacturer intended. At 5, he got a pedal bike, came with training wheels on it. He quickly asked, Daddy, when can we ride trails like we did on the old bike? And I said, well, buddy, you just have to get used to this bike and be able to ride it without training wheels, and then we can go. Probably wasn't 15 minutes later. I was working in the garage and I looked over and he was attempting to remove the training wheels off of the bike himself. At that point, there was really no option other than to go help him do that. So we took the training wheels off, and in about 2 minutes, he was riding that bike, and away he went. This past year, he was old enough to ride on a mountain bike team. He did that, loved it. It will continue. So he continues to get deeper and deeper into the sport, and that's fine by me. We're also at a stage in life where he wants to do things with me. And at some point, I'm sure he will get old enough that he will prefer to do things with friends. But right now, he likes to do a lot of things with me, including mountain biking. The trouble is, he is a far better mountain biker than I am. I have more endurance. I have more strength. Hands down, he has more skill. So I had to buy a new bike so that I could keep up with him. I needed something with a different geometry, and I opted for something that was full suspension to help shorten the skill gap that exists between the two of us. So I did some asking, kind of figured out the kind of bike that I wanted, and then narrowed down to the brand and the model and all of that. And then I began scouring the internet. And I can be a bit picky when it comes to gear. And so, of course, pretty quickly I settled into one of a couple of different year models and this specific color that I wanted, because I didn't like the new colors that had just come out, and that's just the way I am. So thankfully, I found one. I found one bike that fit my requirements, the size, the brand, the model, the color. It was located at a small bike shop in Eugene, Oregon. So I called, said, hey, I just need to verify that your website's correct, that you have this bike in stock. And he did a quick check, said, yeah, we've got it. I said, great. Can you ship that bike? He said, yeah, we can ship it. Where are you? I said, no, I'm in Georgia. He goes, yeah, we can ship it. The only thing is someone has to show up in person to take possession of the bike. And we didn't get into it. I imagine it keeps them in compliance with dealer rules because they're not set up technically as an online dealer. So what had to happen was someone had to buy the bike as transaction 1 and then ship the bike as transaction 2. I said, all right, so you're telling me that I need a friend in Eugene. And he said, that's correct. I said, all right, Jeff, well, would you like to be my friend? And he kind of laughed and said, I can't do that. I said, all right, that's fair. Give me a little time. I may be able to make this happen. So I began calling all of the friends that I have in Oregon. And it turns out all of my friends live in either Portland or Bend. I don't have any friends in Eugene. Now, several of those friends began reaching out to people they knew to see if they could find someone in Eugene that would do this favor for a stranger. In the meantime, I began reaching out to strangers myself. I looked up the business that was located next door to the bike shop, and I just cold called them, said, hey, this is pretty random, but I need someone at your business, either before or after work or on break, to just walk next door and tell them you want to take possession of a bike that has been paid for and it needs to be shipped to Georgia. And she shut me down pretty quick, and she said, no, we can't do that. I said, okay. I posted in a local mountain bike group on Facebook. And of course, if you're not a member of a group, it kind of goes into this holding pattern until it gets approved by an administrator. So I was in that spot there. I did the same thing to a trail advocacy group. And then I thought they probably have a website. So I found their website and sent an email through that as well. Basically, I needed a stranger to do for me what I could not do for myself. And I was beginning to think, as simple as the task was, maybe it was not going to happen. Finally, I get this late night call from a stranger offering to help. And it's a guy from the trail advocacy group. And he kind of verifies that he understands what I need. And he said, yeah, man, I can go in at lunch tomorrow and do that for you. And so we end up having, probably a 30 or 40-minute conversation, just hearing about what they do with their trail advocacy group and about the mountain bike community there. He finds out that I run a nonprofit, and we talk about that. And it was a good conversation, kind of nice to meet one another. And we made plans for him to go in the next day and take possession of the bike and then ask the bike shop to ship it. And the next day, he did just that. Went to the shop, confirmed details that it was indeed the bike that I thought I was buying. He took possession and then said, great, would you ship this bike? And they did, and I got it about a week later. Well, the best part of this whole ordeal is, the best part is the bike. But the silver lining, let's call it that, the silver lining of this whole ordeal was the human connection that took place in the process. Talking to the bike shop owner, who I learned had just recently purchased the shop after years of just being a customer and then working at the shop, meeting this guy on the phone that helped me and hearing about all the good work that his group is doing. And then even like a week later, I get a message from someone that in that Facebook group that I messaged, the administrator finally approved the message and it went out. So I get a Facebook message from this guy in that group, and he's like, that's crazy small world. I used to live in Rome, and now I live in Eugene. If it hasn't worked out already, I'll be happy to help you. And then it turns out we know like 30 of the same people, and he used to work at a local bike shop here that a good friend of mine owned that has since shut down. So there's this human connection piece. And there's something about that just feels right. One person helping another, it just seems like the way that it is supposed to be. So we're going to kick around this concept of helping others by way of talking through something else that happened to me around the same time as buying this bike. But first, welcome to the Everyday Grit Podcast. Conversations to help you think critically, live abundantly, and endure the everyday. I'm your host, Nathan Hicks, and I'm very glad that you're here. Before we continue in our conversation, let's grab some feedback. And this feedback all comes from the episode with Hannah. I didn't write down who sent me this, so my apologies. This person sent a message, 10 out of 10 episode with Hannah. Even in the tragedy of losing her leg, from beginning to end, she seemed to only focus on the triumph. There's a lot of power in that. What a special individual. 100% agree with that. This text came from Amber. She said, last night I listened to your conversation with Hannah. Tragedy to triumph is so accurate. My favorite is that she looked at two potential futures of the legacy this tragedy would leave for her family, and she decided to choose the legacy of triumph. That is, well said and very cool. Speaking of Hannah, she's slated to join us for the starter version of The Wrecking, February 27th and 28th of this year. If you are interested in joining us, let me know. Look, the starter version, the learning, the growth, all that's the same. If you're uncertain of your fitness level, if your fitness feels pretty good, but the whole wilderness component throws you, if you're just uncertain of the duration of the standard, or if the whole thing just seems a little daunting and new, then the starter is a great place to begin. If you have questions about which one is right for you, just reach out. I'll be happy to chat with you and we can figure it out. But there's some kind of hints for people that the starter might be for. So love to have you. And if you've not yet listened to my conversation with Hannah, make sure and check that out. Okay, let's get on with this episode. So a couple days later, after the bike thing, my son and I are in the checkout line at Publix, and something just looks off with the person in front of us. And so I began to watch and listen, and you can tell that something's not quite right. There's a man kind of frantically looking through his wallet, maybe frantic, maybe a little too strong of a word, but with some urgency, looking through his wallet, clearly looking for something. The cashier begins trying to help. She's making suggestions and offering alternatives and possible solutions for whatever predicament he's in. And there's a little bit of a language barrier, but it appears that this man doesn't have a way to pay for what has been rung up. And it appears as if he thought he had a way to pay in his wallet and then open it, and his card or whatever wasn't there. And I'm just kind of taking this all in. And I feel this nudge internally that, hey, you should help. And immediately after the nudge, I feel or I notice a little bit of resistance. And I'm kind of asking myself, well, am I right about what's happening? I don't want to add to any commotion. I don't really want to draw attention to myself or the situation. I don't want to embarrass this guy, and I don't want to be wrong or put myself out there if I have misread the situation. I think less than not wanting to help, I was more kind of caught in a loop of overthinking this whole thing, which I can be prone to do. So I go to make one last minute assessment, still caught in this loop. And this is all very fast, but I go to make this one final assessment before doing something or not. And I felt a very obvious prompting to stop analyzing and take action. And I might have had an accompanying thought, a very distinct thought along the lines of, hey, Hicks, you just bought a mountain bike. Why are you hesitating? Help out right now. And in that moment, I realized that the opportunity to help was closing, that the window was closing. There was a very narrow window of time to help. And if I hesitated, that window would close and the opportunity would be gone. So I motioned to the cashier that I would like to pay for his groceries. And she kind of raised her eyebrows and asks if I'm sure. And again, I'm sure she wants to make sure that she's not misunderstanding what I'm communicating. And so I reassure her it's what I want to do. And I kind of slide around behind the guy nonchalantly and swipe my card. And she begins to try to tell him, hey, look, everything's all right. You can stop looking for your card. And he says, I can't find my card, or I thought my card was in here. And I just looked at him and I said, it's all right, man. It turns out that you didn't need your card today. Jesus loves you a lot and he loves me a lot. And we have to help each other out sometimes. And he says, thank you. And he goes on. And as my son and I are then checking out, the cashier, thanks me for helping. And I think I just said something to the effect of, what else could I do? I have the means, there's a need. What else is there to do? When the need is so obvious and I have the ability to help, I just didn't see another option. As we were leaving, I couldn't help but again recognize this through line of human connection. In addition to a tangible need being met, this interaction created a point of connection that wouldn't have otherwise been there between me and the person that I helped, between me and the cashier, and even between she and that guy as well. Again, this through line of human connection. So we're walking back to the truck, and my son looked up at me and he said, Daddy, what happened in the store? Why did we help that guy out? And he's a very kind-hearted kid. He wasn't asking, like, why did we help? As if he didn't want to. He was just trying to understand the situation and probably make sure that what he thought happened is what happened. And this is just what came to me. So I said, well, there's a verse in the Bible that said, as you did to one of the least of these, my brothers, you did to me. And we kind of talked about what that verse means and how it applied to the situation. And I said it seemed like the right thing to do to help. And that satisfied him, and away we went. Well, we hadn't even made it back home yet. And we were driving, and this question entered my mind. Well, who else is the least of these? How do we define it? If that guy was the least of these, at least in this situation, who else is the least of these? So I had some ideas, and I started trying to put some structure to how you determine, or that sounds too clinical, but try to put some structure to defining the least of these. And one thought I had was this thought of, someone who has a need that he or she cannot meet on their own. This guy, in this case, couldn't meet the need in front of him. Now, he may have had a card elsewhere. He may have given it to his wife. Like, it may not have been that he didn't have the money, but in that moment, he didn't have the means to meet the need. The trouble is, I wasn't the least of these when I bought a mountain bike. I needed someone to do for me what I could not do. But Look, I'm attempting to purchase what is essentially a luxury item. I don't think that qualifies as the least of these. Is it kind? Is it charitable? Yes, it's those things. I just don't know that I would say that I was among the least of these as I tried to buy a mountain bike. So maybe essentiality comes into play. You know, how essential is the need in question? So maybe it's a need that a person cannot meet for themselves. Plus, it is essential. There's such a high consequence if it goes unmet that it's important to meet that need. And obviously, food, shelter, clothing, those things immediately come to mind. So, can't be met on its own. It's essential. Maybe we add, a need for which there is no cultural, societal, or religious structure in place to meet it. There are, a myriad of programs available via religious, charitable, government outlets that all help meet the needs of people in need. But almost assuredly, in the course of our lifetime, we'll encounter someone who has a need for which there is not a program in place. Or maybe there is, but it's failing. Or maybe the person falls through the crack of that system for some administrative reason, or because their need is not determined to be severe enough, whatever. So a need that isn't readily able to be met by one of these other places. Or maybe it could be met by one of those places, but it's more urgent. Let's say, for instance, that this man that I encountered in Publix did indeed need the money. He didn't even have it, which I'm not sure that that's the case, like I said, but let's pretend. Well, in that moment, there's not an entity or agency that can help him. He's outside of the purview. And so his need in that moment is more urgent than can be met through those other channels. I would hesitate to stick that structure as something that's rigid. But the thought process was helpful to me, because then I began to say, well, who else then? Who else, in addition to someone like this guy I encountered, who else is the least of these? Person with an essential or urgent need, one that can't be met for his or herself, one for which there is no program available to help in real time. Well, I wonder then, what about someone who's lonely or isolated and in need of companionship? They need the voice of a friend. After all, is a relationship not an essential need? I think we can all agree that we were created for relationship. And in the absence, we would come to understand or agree that that's a pretty essential need. What about someone who's anxious and or depressed and in need of a reminder of the hope they have, a reminder which they cannot provide or manufacture for themselves in a moment? What about someone who has experienced some type of transition in life and hasn't quite found solid footing on the other side of it? Perhaps they just need a steadying hand of hope to help them settle in on the other side of this transition. What about those who grieve, those who have experienced loss? Psalm 34 tells us that the Lord is near the brokenhearted and he saves those who are crushed in spirit. Certainly, the examples above qualifies people who are brokenhearted. And if the Lord cares for them, shouldn't we? I think those people qualify as the least of these. What about those who are working to grow or improve themselves in some way, shape, or form, who need guidance, direction, support, encouragement? Those who may be struggling through some medical diagnosis. Or what about those who are crippled under the weight of hardship, either self-induced or hardship that has been passed on to them involuntarily by someone else? The Bible teaches that we are to bear one another's burdens, even if, this is quite the kicker, even if those burdens are the result of a misstep or mistake, or in the Bible's words, a sin. We are to bear one another's burdens. I think people in that situation qualify as the least of these. So those are the ones that immediately come to mind for me, those examples above. Just as I kind of let my mind wander, just off the top of my head, it is in no way an exhaustive list. And so I wonder, who would you add to the list? Who would you add to a list of people that qualify as the least of these? As I think about it, perhaps the trick is not to see how narrowly we can define the least of these, but rather how broadly. Maybe we ought to take a more generous or broad view of things. If we did that, then I wonder what happens if we act. How might it look if we embraced a broad definition of the least of these and we began to intervene when we saw the opportunity to do so? What difference might it make in the world around us? I'm going to take the risk of making an assumption, and I realize what comes with that risk. If that happens, it will not be the first time, so I'm comfortable taking the risk. But I'm going to assume that not many of you would argue against the idea that the examples I've shared represent people in need. So why are we sometimes hesitant to act? Well, let's run down a couple of options. Again, a non-exhaustive list of options. Option number one, we're just jerks. And we assume that everyone deserves the situation they're in. They should take responsibility and fix themselves, and so we don't help. That's an easy answer, and I'm sure it may be true at times, but I don't really think that sums it up. Perhaps the one in need doesn't ask, and so we don't offer. If this guy in Publix didn't ask, I had a pretty rough day the other day. I didn't ask for help. And I bet you don't either. I bet your default isn't to ask for help. And so sometimes the need is simply hidden. Even when we're looking, sometimes there's not a visible or evident need. The need that's there is there, but it's obscured. And unless we know someone kind of from the inside out, we may not know that that need exists. I know some people right now who are going through it. I mean, walking through hell. And at first glance, you'd think they're doing okay. You may, by looking at external variables, even be jealous of what you perceive their life to be. If you knew the details, however, you would know that there's deep, deep need in those people's lives. The simple fact is, though, when the need isn't stated or when it's obvious, our assessment can be clouded. It can be difficult to ascertain if there's the need, and if it's there, what's the severity, and if it's there and it's somewhat severe, what's our role? Other times we just fall into this trap of overanalyzing the legitimacy of a need or the person's ability to meet the need. Maybe we think or we see the need, but we figure they've got it. It's not that we don't think people have problems. It's just that we figure most of them are managing it okay. And so we hesitate, even if there's no ill intent. Maybe we don't want to be wrong. We don't want to overstep bounds. We don't want to risk embarrassing the other person by stepping in only to have them say, hey, no, I'm good. I've got it. And all it takes is the slightest bit of hesitation, and the moment passes, and we've missed the opportunity to help. We've also missed the opportunity to connect. I was leading a backpacking course, a number of years ago, and late in the second day, we still had some miles to go, but it was late enough that we'd been hiking a long way. We'd been going uphill a long way. It was now dark, and one of the students began, they just weren't doing so well. They began feeling lightheaded, a little dizzy, really weak, and they repeatedly had to stop to kind of regain footing and just take a minute before they could continue. At some point, they faltered in their step, and there was enough of an outward sign that I stepped up and did kind of a quick medical assessment. I wanted to make sure that they were all right from a medical standpoint. And I determined pretty quickly and pretty easily that this person legitimately needed some hydration and some nutrition. Their body needed those things to finish the day. And for the sake of the group and the learning and what was happening there, that this need would be best met by someone in the group. And so I turned to the rest of the group and I said, hey, this person needs X, Y, and Z. One of you guys help him quickly. Nothing. They just looked at me. So I said it again, and still only hesitation. So I said it a third time, and this time with a little more emphasis. I've been told, though I don't typically yell in situations like this, that I have a way of leaving little doubt as to the message I'm trying to convey. And I think this was one of those times. And I think I said something to the effect of, when we talk about violence of action, which we had been, this is what we're talking about. Seeing a need and acting on it without hesitation. Now, why did they hesitate? It probably wasn't because they didn't care. These were kind people. They were good people. It was probably because they thought someone else would first, or for one of the reasons that we discussed. They didn't want to put themselves out there. They didn't want to be wrong. Whatever, any one of those reasons. They were stuck in some sort of analysis, or they were tired on their own and they thought this would be better if someone else steps in. For whatever reason, there was hesitation. You know, that term violence of action is a military term, and it's used to describe taking swift, decisive action to neutralize a threat. And I wonder what it would be like in light of this whole discussion if we all showed violence of action to meet the needs we saw around us. What's more, what if we worked to sharpen our senses so that we have eyes to see the needs around us? What if we could see and perceive those things more clearly than we do now? And then we work to develop a reflex of acting rather than hesitating, taking steps to intervene and to help rather than being stuck in analysis. We develop a reflex of taking action rather than becoming stuck in a loop. It doesn't mean we don't assess. It just means we don't get stuck there. What if we acted swiftly and decisively, even overwhelmingly, to care for one another, to care for the people around us? I wonder what the world would look like then. I wonder how it might look differently than it does now. I think it'd be great. I think the world would be better for it. And not only for the needs being met, but for the connection that happens in the process. Because oftentimes a need being met, that's a short-term transaction. That's a short-term event. But the connection that happens in the process, it has legs. It goes and goes and goes. Sometimes for a really long time, that connection's huge. I think this one's fairly straightforward. I mean, it's kind of short and to the point. I don't know that you need a lot of summary, but if I were to try to summarize and prompt you to action, it would be by encouraging you to do these three things. The first is to work to hone the skill of perceiving the needs of those around you, whether those who live in your circle or relationships, or those whose paths you cross in the course of any given day. Either way, the needs are there. So work to develop your ability to perceive those needs. The second thing would be to speed up or simplify your own assessment process so that you can reduce the likelihood of getting stuck in a loop and missing the opportunity to help altogether. Pay attention to your bias. Identify what keeps you from acting, because it's probably a little different for each of us. And if you're aware of your defaults and your biases, then when you fall into that state inadvertently, you can more easily kind of snap out of it and get to work. The third thing would be to rewire your default to action over avoidance. Strive to develop a perspective that sees helping humankind as first an act of connection, and secondly, an act of service or charity or kindness. And that's a small, subtle shift, but I think it's a really important one. You know, at a fundamental level, the transaction that's taking place is an acknowledgement that the individuals involved are all made in the image and likeness of our Creator, and that there is no one both without need and without the ability to meet need. I think that's it. It's just something that came up, something that's been on my mind, so I thought I'd share. And you might appreciate a shorter episode than what we sometimes do. I'd love to know what you think. Let me know. Let's make this a conversation. I want to hear from you. How does this resonate? Certainly, I missed something, so let me know that as well, and give me your take on this whole idea of helping others and determining who among us is the least of these. Your input makes this better. It makes me better for sure. And I appreciate that part of this process. So if you're inclined to do so, drop me an email at everydaygritpodcast@gmail.com. I'd love to hear from you. And if you're interested in The Reckoning, February 27th, 28th is the starter. We're looking at dates in late April for the standard. If you've got questions about either one of those, you can reach out to that email address as well. You guys can also find me on Instagram. The show's account is at Everyday Grit Podcast. My personal is at NJHIX. Come follow along there. Hey, I appreciate all of you guys. Thanks for listening. Carry on.